Luke Fink is an embedded software firmware engineer at the Georgia Tech Research Institute, GTRI. He has been involved in the open architecture effort at GTRI for 5 years, focusing on advancing open standards. Luke specializes in both in-band and out-of-band chassis management and is actively involved in developing conformance tools. His work primarily involves enhancing interoperability and efficiency in defense technology systems, ensuring that these systems can integrate seamlessly with various hardware components.
Good morning, everyone. As mentioned, I'll be discussing open source out-of-band chassis management for SOSA. So just introduction. Again, my name is Luke Fink. I was the project lead on the internal research and development project for open source chassis management at GTRI, and then just a few other introductions to the team. Aaron Loggins is the open systems development branch head at GTRI LSys Lab. Hakeem Wilson is the leader of another internal research and development project at GTRI covering IPMCs. And then Malik Perfoy is a research engineer that was critical for the execution of the original IRAB project. So just a overview real quick. I know this is preaching to the choir a bit, but just a reminder that open systems in general is something that is mandated by the Title X requirement and is urgent for open systems modernization to keep United States capabilities advancing in comparison to the worldwide field. Just keeping this in mind when discussing kind of the mindset behind the desire to open source as much of SOSA systems as possible. So an overview of out-of-band system management or out-of-band chassis management. It is a hardware management interface that exists outside of the operating system. It allows primarily for remote monitoring and configuration of hardware. So some of the functionality of that is like real-time monitoring of hardware parameters, like potentially voltage or temperature sensors, as well as changing parameters on those sensors, such as the thresholds that trigger an alert or a hysteresis value. It can also log the state or errors that occur in that chassis, as well as handle restarting and power state. So it's based in SOSA, it's based on VITA 46.11 standard, as well as the Intel IPMI standard, which is essentially a bit of an older standard that covers the same concept, but originally intended for server racks. So SOSA has kind of adapted the system management that existed in older server racks for avionics chassis. Chassis management overall is a key component of SOSA, as well as other DoD hardware standards such as HOST and CMOS, which are kind of similar to SOSA in some regards, especially the hardware aspects. IPMI itself is a I2C interface, and it's on the P0 connector of all SOSA profiles and is required by the standard. Overall, the architecture is basically a chassis manager device like the one you see on the right hand of the slide that communicates to individual smaller controllers on each of the plug-in cards in a SOSA system. Each of those plug-in cards has that controller on it that is not necessarily connected to the main CPU of the system and isn't the operating system controller. So it should operate even if the operating system is stuck or the card is powered down. So it just needs 3.3 volt box as well. So basically the problem that we were trying to accomplish or trying to address with the internal research effort was to kind of help with some issues with having basically a wide variety of different implementations between the uh, the software interface between different hardware implementations. So often we would get in a chassis manager and it has basically just a command line interface to interact with. And it's not really possible to even install any custom software onto that necessarily. And there's not really a way to collaborate between different parties. So you can't have one vendor build the chassis manager hardware and then have another one work on a software functionality for that due to kind of the custom implementation of how that actually works. In addition, there's not a conformance tool that has been accepted for handling chassis management or IPMI. Um, in addition, developing software to use RMCP, which is basically chassis management over LAN, requires pretty good understanding of the standard itself, and you do most of the work actually handling parsing the messages rather than using like a standard library for it. Um, in addition, just another kind of complication is that there is basically a wide range of potential form factors and levels of capability for these chassis managers. So some use cases may be on a very simple like RTOS uh, microcontroller, and some go all the way up to having an operating system on the chassis manager itself, and basically being like an SBC um, if there's additional capability needed, basically. Um, for avionics specific issues, due to basically all these challenges, it's kind of been questioned, uh, is it really worth committing maybe what could be a full slot of chassis space to this chassis manager? And how do we actually implement some of these additional management features? And basically, it creates a pretty high cost to developing these any management application in the first place. And then if you have to do a hardware upgrade, it may have to be completely redesigned with each change, basically. So to address that, this is just a summary of GTRI's efforts at the current time. The first one, SMITE, is the System Management Interface for Test Execution, which is a Python software, which is basically the conformance tester prototype for out-of-band chassis management. So it's a Python software uses that IPMI over a LAN interface to interact with the chassis manager and basically run through each of the messages in IPMI via 46.11 and SOSA specific messages and functionality to just check to make sure that the chassis manager is responding appropriately to those and is able to test other picks in the chassis as well. So in addition, there's been efforts to create basically a reference design for a pluggable form factor for host chassis management, which is similar to SOSA for the most part, but kind of diverging a little bit in maybe not having such a standardized profile like SOSA would, and doing some concepts for that. As well as developing basically the in-band version of basically the in-band management, similar to what SOSA has for host, which is something that's built on top of out-of-band, basically, and additional functionality that chassis manager can accomplish. And then, as mentioned before, the primary topic of this presentation is going to be the open source chassis management internal research and development project, which was to develop an open source library to use on the chassis manager itself. So the goal of that is to provide full functionality for chassis manager interfaces. So implementing IPMI over LAN, serial, and then just some baseline functionality for event handling and logging, as well as providing a library to implement each of those messages in the IPMI standard. In addition, there's currently an ongoing effort at GTRI for basically a board manager, which is going to be developing an open source hardware and software platform to standardize the board management over IPMI. And the goal is to provide basically a reference design for the full functionality of a SOSA aligned Beta 46.11 Tier 3 IPMC. So the open source chassis management library that I've mentioned is called Opossum. It's a C++ library that should be cross-platform. It uses the Nano language standard, so it can basically minimize the memory usage for some of those simpler implementations. It basically provides code structures for each message, allowing you to assemble or parse messages pretty easily in like more of a software manner rather than understanding the assembly of one of these IPMI messages with basically normally you would have to interact with raw hexadecimal responses or assembly, but the library should allow you to just basically assemble it like a software class. I have an example of that a little bit later, but the goal as well is to have multiple software units running on the chassis manager be able to use the library, basically giving you a single entry point to the IPMI interface on the chassis manager itself, so that you would be able to basically reuse that software on a different hardware target as long as it implements the software library, as well as having basically a platform for multiple applications to interact. Basically, the library handles the primary function is to handle assembly and parsing of IPMI messages, and then a basic implementation of basically the sessions for IPMI over LAN, so handling authentication as well as keeping sessions up, and then just some basic structures for some of that baseline functionality, such as the system event log and platform events. So basically, if you were to want to use this library on a new hardware target, the burden would be focusing on just getting the I2C interface to work on that hardware and the LAN interface rather than rewriting code for managing IPMI itself. And then basically after that's complete, you would use you would be able to implement advanced capabilities on top of that software. So basically, this is just a kind of illustrative example on how maybe an RMCP request would be handled. So again, this is IPMI over LAN. Everything in yellow is something that is not handled by the software library itself, and then green is handled. So basically, if you receive a Ethernet or RMCP message over LAN, the UDP packet, you would be able to basically parse that out in the library and then generate an IPMI message to send over that I2C interface. But the actual transmission of that message over the interface would be something that would have to be implemented per hardware target. And then once you capture that I2C response back from the device you were targeting, the library itself would be able to parse that out, but the software would still need to determine what to do with that information. So as I mentioned earlier, this is just kind of an example of what you would have to do to put out a request. So um, basically, you just need to know the target you're trying to send to, and then a few parameters for the message itself. I think you may not necessarily even need some of this information, but it's all standard basically. So the net function number and the command number are just something that you should know, should be able to look up in a table or use the name of the message. But essentially, the idea of the slide, without going through the code in too much detail, is um, just to show that basically the two lines under the generator usage are all you would really have to do to get back basically the message that you would send over the I2C interface. And you can basically assign a parameter in that request, as you can see in that like bottom block of code. So if we're using the set ACPI power state request message, and we wanted to set the change the ACPI device power state in the request itself, we can just basically set that with this parameter in that class itself, and then get that response back, or basically get the generated message with that parameter in it pretty easily. And then the parser, much the same, or similar anyway. This is just showing basically that you can break out the response. So this one is for self-test result, basically showing that you can pull out everything that you get in the response itself and use it in kind of a software manner rather than raw hexadecimal. So some results on this. This was successfully implemented on a Raspberry Pi 4, an NVIDIA Jetson, and a STM G family microcontroller. So it basically, we were able to implement it on a like RTOS low power implementation for that STM32, as well as kind of a full Linux OS level implementation on the Raspberry Pi. So it was also implemented on some of the initial SOSA small form factor prototypes efforts that are going on right now due to kind of the smaller size. So for example, at the bottom here, you can see that the actual chassis manager itself is a pretty small portion of this board, so we're able to implement it as part of a small form factor chassis for that prototype. So in addition, this was demonstrated at the MOSA Summit in 2024. Basically, if during the tri-service demo, kind of that in-band interface that was demonstrated with host used the library for the chassis manager for that chassis itself. In addition, it is being utilized for the initial conformance tester prototype to basically have a chassis manager that's more easily manipulated for use with the SMITE testing. And then in addition, it was put on basically the interface board for a Vita 90 prototype chassis, which is small form factor as well. And then just kind of circling back a little bit to something I mentioned earlier, this is a kind of an overview of the other internal research and development effort that's underway, which is the open source board manager. So this is basically the smaller controller that would go on the plug-in card itself. That's currently being led up by Hakeem Wilson at GTRI. And the goal is to make, again, a tier 3 SOSA IPMC and give basically open hardware and software design for that as well. And then just a quick overview of kind of how this came to be. GTRI essentially has a open systems integration lab where we're continuously working to kind of help try to advance the state of SOSA itself to basically test, validate, and prototype social line components, and we can additionally quickly reconfigure to test new hardware. We basically have a set of reconfigurable dev backplanes that allow for use of any social profile. So we can quickly reroute and test everything. And we're working to continually upgrade software development and prototype systems as they become available. And then just to mention as well, you may have heard of some of this. The SOSA Plug Fest, which is occurring within the next few months, is a event dedicated to advancing SOSA itself. And at this event, there will be a chassis management group, which should be potentially interacting with some of what we mentioned here. And yep, that's basically everything I had. So, are there any questions?